In this video, we're going to learn about coaching innovation groups. Now, innovation group coaches have a multitude of roles. One of them is to be a coach and to keep the projects moving forward. One is to be a team doctor and to keep the group functioning properly. And part of it's to be a game show host and to synchronize everything up. Well, the coaching process really begins the moment the Jumpstart ends, and it doesn't end until the final presentation. So there are several stages the coach has to be present for. The role of the coach is multifaceted. They have to keep the project going, they have to be a teacher and inform people, they have to develop people, they have to empower them to make their own decisions. But at the same time, they have to have a very positive attitude. They have to be patient with people. They have to be supportive. So it's not just what you do, it's how you do it that makes an effective team coach. Now, the aims of the coach are very important because they have to keep the project on track. They have to make sure that everybody's focused on the desired results. They have to make sure that the team comes together and has a sense of identity and mutual respect. It has to be energized. We have to create an environment where feedback is constructive and is actually used and taken to heart so that we can make adjustments. We have to confront the hidden problems and we have to solve the problems, not only the technical problems, but the group problems as we move along. So there's a lot of things we have to attend to at the same time. Now, when coaching groups, there's many things we have to keep in mind. The first thing you must be mindful of is groups are not formed initially. There are several stages to group formation. Well, the first stage is what's called the forming stage, and this is where everybody comes together. They get to know each other, what people's strengths and weaknesses are. The second phase is the storming phase, and this is often the most challenging phase for a coach. This is where arguments happen, there's a struggle for power, there are some differences of opinion about how the work should happen, and this is usually pretty difficult, and you have to really stick with the group and understand that this is kind of the adolescent phase of a group. Then the group begins to normalize. They begin to agree on some things. They understand people's strengths and weaknesses. They begin to learn how to talk to each other with mutual respect. And only at the very end does the group go into the performing phase where they're a high-performing group, they're efficient, and they're effective. When coaching innovation groups, I want you to imagine that you're on a balcony and you're looking down at the group objectively and you're asking yourself these questions as if you were an anthropologist. What's working? What's not working? How is this group functioning? Where are they agreeing? Where are they disagreeing? What's not being talked about that should be talked about? And what you have to do at this phase is objectively keep your own counsel and get yourself some insights on the group and how the group is working as if the group were the project. Now, the view from the balcony is only the first step. The next step, I want you to put yourself inside the group and imagine that you're the various group members. There are 4 points of view in the group. What are they thinking about? And they're going to have different questions, and different questions are going to be more important depending upon the phase of the project. For example, when projects start, typically the most important point of view is the create or green point of view. Ask yourself the question from the green team member point of view, which is this project moving in the right direction? Is it innovative or breakthrough enough? As the project begins to advance, you might want to take the yellow and blue point of view. From the yellow or collaborate point of view, you might want to ask yourself, do we have the right kind of people here? Do we have the right kind of culture? Is this really of interest to us? From the blue point of view, you might want to ask yourself, is this really going to pay? Can we really do this in the amount of time that we've got? And finally, at the last stage in the aft position, we might want to ask ourselves those red or control-based issues that our red or control-based team members may have, which is this really feasible? Can we do this with the standards of our system? Can we really make the cost work? So we're looking down from the balcony and we're looking up from the floor, and we're trying to ask ourselves the questions that are not only objective, but highly subjective to the people in the group. This is going to make us mindful of all the various dimensions of how this group is working. Now, in the same way that we look at innovation projects, we're going to look at our innovation group that's running the innovation project. We're going to use the same lens. We're going to look at the innovation genome in all 4 quadrants, and we're going to start by asking ourselves, what's not working? What do we need to stop or do less of? Then we're going to ask ourselves, what is working that we can build on? What do we need to start or do more of? And finally, what's working and we want to continue doing it kind of the way we're doing it now? This will allow us to make decisions, and most importantly, it will give us our action plan for the group so the group can be high performing and successful on the task. Now, there are a multitude of innovation group coaching tools. We're going to discuss a few of them here, but it's important to note that in innovation, constructive conflict is the key. You want conflict. What you don't want is destructive conflict. So we're going to learn some tools here how to finesse conflict, but we're not trying to get rid of it. We're trying to harness it. So one way of looking at conflict is to look at the situation, the severity of the conflict, and how it actually plays out on the project. Well, one of the things you can do with conflict is simply avoid it, meaning don't give it any energy, because a lot of conflict is just noise. It doesn't really matter. It burns itself out. Another way of dealing with conflict is to accommodate it. So if you've got two parts of a group that are really at odds with each other and are destructive, you might want to have them work on different parts of the project, sort of divide and conquer, maybe bring them back later where there is agreement. It could be that a compromise is in order here, that there are things they could do together and it doesn't really affect the final project. You could have these two people or groups or multiple groups compete with each other, sort of an experiment, see which one is better, which one's going to win, and sort of everybody can acknowledge that's the better idea or the better way to do it. And finally, you can collaborate. One of the things I like to do is to take people with very different points of view and put them together, because if you focus on the end goal, inevitably they're going to have to find ways to have constructive conflict to get it done. Now, of course, there are times in which it's inappropriate to do these things, and this matrix is provided to help you think through that. Now, on a regular basis, executives have to deal with conflict, and they have to figure out a way to finesse it. All we're going to do here is try and finesse it a little bit more so that it becomes constructive and can be harnessed into new ideas, innovative ideas. So one of the ways to do this is to focus on the data. Everybody has an opinion and a subjective point of view, but keep coming back to data that everybody in the group thinks is relevant. Maybe it's a report from an association, or maybe it's something that a university did. Another way of doing this is to generate multiple alternatives. This is an old consulting trick. You know, the options aren't black and white, yes or no. The options are a wide array of options. So we might want to do some brainstorming here about possible solutions. Another way of coming up with a way to finesse conflict is to come up with the common goal. So think of it like a Venn diagram where we got sort of the two circles. What's in the middle of the circle? What is shared? Another way of dealing with this is humor. It's something I find works all the time. Groups sometimes become too heavy. They become too full of themselves. Sometimes it's good to go play, have somebody from the outside come in and sort of make light of it, make light of things yourself, and it sort of takes the pressure off what's going on in the group. Another thing that happens in groups is sometimes somebody takes over the group. They're very autocratic, they're boisterous, they have a real strong personality. What you might want to do in that situation is change the gene pool a little bit. Invite somebody else into the group to kind of change the power structure. Make sure that that person doesn't take over. And of course, finally, you can have consensus with qualification. And that means, okay, I agree, but I agree with this qualification that we get this data. Or I agree, but the qualification is I only agree with this part of the idea, this small part I don't agree with. Or I agree, but I'd like to see how this plays out when we run the experiment, and I'd like to revisit it maybe 90 days from now. The key here is to be actively engaged in the conflict of the group, because conflict is either going to be the most important thing that the group does because it's going to produce these amazing hybrids, or it's going to be the most destructive thing the group does and derails the project. Now, it's inevitable that groups get stuck. They run out of energy, things are too complicated. There's a number of reasons that groups really find themselves in a static state. And your job is to help sort of nudge them off of that and get them started again. In a sense, the same way that you jumpstart a project, you're jumpstarting the group. So one thing that happens to group is they get overwhelmed. There's too many things, there's too much data. In that case, try and focus the group. Try and shrink the field a little bit. Make it a little easier for them to deal with. Groups get exhausted. They just get burnt out. So what you might want to do is give them a little time off, or maybe put some other players on the group because they've been running too fast for too long. Groups become directionless. And even if you started with a really strong strategy, a lot of times you have to go back and revisit it. You can't revisit a strategy too often. And that really helps the group focus on what the original aim was, because the longer you go, the more they're going to be misaligned. Groups can become hopeless. They think nothing is possible. And when that happens, what you really need to do is try something really, really big, something that's got a lot of ambition, something that says we're going to completely change the way we're doing things, and it really is going to re-energize the groups. Groups become war-torn because they've had too much conflict over time. You want to maybe take them off-site for a while, create a common identity. Maybe you create a logo or a symbol or a motto, have them do things together where they really start trusting each other again. Groups can often feel worthless. And when a group feels worthless, it's very important maybe to bring some senior people back into the picture and tell them how important it is. Maybe important to get some small wins out of the group and create some momentum by doing some prototypes or some proof of concepts. And finally, groups, particularly innovation groups, can feel really alone. So it's really important to kind of bring the group back into the larger organization so that the larger organization gives them some positive reinforcement on all the great work that they're doing. So you have to pay attention to kind of what's going on with the group, and on a regular basis re-energize the group, re-jumpstart the group to get them moving forward. One of the major reasons for conflict in groups has to do with decision making. Now there's two aspects to that. First, are what are called decision rights, and it means who has the right to make that decision, who has the power, who has the expertise, who has the line of sight to make that decision. And that requires that we know the roles and responsibilities, the talents of people in the group. So for example, if I'm making a new car, the chief design engineer is probably the person who's going to make the best decision about the actual engineering and structure of the car. But if it comes to selling the car, that's probably the chief marketing officer, whoever represents the marketing function. You don't want them to cross into the other's domains because they have unique expertise and we need to listen to them. Now, the second area is how decision-making itself happens and the sneaky spots that happen in each type of decision-making and the kinds of things we have to do as coaches to correct this. So first, it could be the power structure. If you've got a group where somebody's very autocratic and they come in and they make a lot of decisions, but people really aren't bought in, they're passive-aggressive, we're going to have to find a way to kind of tone down that top-down or hierarchical approach. Another might be group silence. Remember, when a group is quiet, it's not consent. It's dissent. So we're going to have to figure out how to draw that group out. Maybe we speak to them offline. The notion is maybe they're feeling intimidated in the group, so we're going to have to make some adjustments. One of the biggest things to watch out for in a group is a small subgroup, a minority in the larger group tries to take over because they have a very strong opinion, a very strong point of view. They're like a vigilante. What you have to do is energize the larger group to offset this very rabid small group's point of view. And you want to be able to use this conflict in a constructive way to produce those hybrids, those new answers. Watch out for compromise, because a lot of times compromise is everybody abandoning what's really interesting about a project for something that's vanilla or ordinary. Watch out for voting, because voting can often offset the real debate that an organization or a project needs to have in order to get to that really interesting solution. And finally, consensus. The biggest challenge of consensus is it takes too long to make a decision where everybody agrees. You don't have to have everybody agreeing. You have to have enough people to move forward, and you have to do it in such a way that you haven't alienated a large percentage of your group. An easy way to make decisions in groups is to look at what the payoff is and how hard or how easy it is to do something. So simply by using this matrix, when you look at a whole bunch of ideas, ask your group which of these ideas are really big wins, things that are really going to make a lot of difference on this project and are easy to do. This is low-hanging fruit. Those are the things you do first. They're big wins. Then you want to focus on things that are easy to do, but the payout's not so big. These are small wins. You want to have a lot of small wins because they create momentum. They pull you forward. They're easy to do. Then you want to look at things that have a big payoff, but they're kind of hard to do. These are special cases. Now, a warning to you. You never want to have a group that has more than one or two special cases, because if it does, it'll get bogged down and it will lose its sense of prioritization. Finally, you want to look at things that really aren't going to pay out that much and are kind of hard to do. These are time wasters. Now, you really want to focus on this quadrant, because what you want to do here is take somewhere between a third and a half of the things that you're working on, and you'll want to get rid of them. You want to focus on the great. You want to get rid of the good. This matrix will help you very quickly as a group to understand how it's making decisions, an easy way to work out prioritization, and to understand the differences in opinion that go into decision making on this project. In summary, remember the coach of an innovation group has two roles. One, they have to keep the project moving forward, making sure that it's overcoming barriers and it's going to achieve that breakthrough innovation target. But the second is to keep the group functioning, to help the group grow, to develop the group, because not only is the group going to work on this project, it's developing the culture and capability to work on future projects. Remember, groups have phases of development, and you have to coach them differently depending on the phase. You have to take both an objective and a subjective point of view. You have to understand that groups are going to have conflict. Remember, we want conflict, but we want constructive conflict, so you have to finesse it. And finally, remember that groups have to make decisions, and your job is to help them clarify how they're making decisions and to prioritize the most important things first so that they can effectively and efficiently achieve those innovation targets.